My daughter's father-in-law put my son in an emergency room over a disagreement that had nothing to do with him. He assumed it would end there. The waiting room hummed under fluorescent light, that particular hospital hum that never quite goes silent no matter what hour it is. 2 chairs away, Ethan sat with his arm braced in a temporary splint, his eyebrow butterflied shut with a strip of taupe, still pale from the adrenaline finally wearing off. Carol stood at the vending machine, buying coffee neither of us would actually drink, her hands needing something to do more than her mouth needed something to say. I sat very still, a small leather notebook open on my knee, a pen moving across it in short, steady lines. I've carried some version of that notebook since my first year on the force, an old habit I never managed to quit. Even 4 years into retirement, Carol used to tease me about it, that it was the one thing that never let me fully leave the job behind. Tonight, for the first time in a long while, I was glad I hadn't. A doctor passed through briefly, telling us Ethan's wrist would need a proper cast in the morning, that the eyebrow would heal clean, that he'd been lucky. Ethan managed a small, tired smile at that word, lucky, like it didn't quite fit the evening we'd just had. Around us, the ordinary chaos of an emergency room moved on without pausing for us. A gurney rolling past, a child crying somewhere behind a curtain, a nurse calling a name that wasn't ours. I kept writing. Times. Exact words. Who was standing where. He had no idea I'd spent 30 years learning exactly what to do with a night like this one. 6 weeks earlier, none of that waiting room existed yet. Just an ordinary spring in a life that had settled into its own comfortable rhythm. My name is Samuel Doran. Everyone calls me Sam. I'm 63 years old, a retired homicide detective out of Cincinnati, married to my wife Carol for 36 years now, the two of us settling into a retirement that mostly involves her garden, my woodworking, and far more crossword puzzles than either of us expected to develop opinions about. We have 2 children. Claire is 29, sharp and steady, working as a marketing director for a healthcare company downtown, married 3 years now to a young man named Julian Voss. Ethan is 26, a paramedic working out of the same district I used to patrol decades earlier, still living 20 minutes from us. Close enough for Sunday dinners more often than not. Close enough that Carol still worries about him the exact same way she did when he was 17. I've carried some version of a small leather notebook since my first year on the force, a habit I picked up from an old training officer who told me plainly that memory lies but ink doesn't. I still write things down, small inconsistencies, gut feelings, anything that doesn't sit right, even now, 4 years retired, with nothing left to investigate but overdue library books and the occasional dispute over fence lines. Carol calls it the thing that never let me fully retire, usually while shaking her head fondly over her coffee. She's not wrong, and we both know it. Claire's marriage into the Voss family had always carried a quiet undertone I noticed early on but never pushed. Julian's father, Marcus, ran a boutique investment firm downtown, successful, precise, accustomed to being the final word in any room he occupied, the kind of man who'd built a career out of being right often enough that people stopped bothering to check. He had a habit of managing his son's life closely. Decisions, career moves, even small things like where they vacationed or which neighborhood they should buy in a way that seemed to extend, by quiet default, to Claire as well. She never complained outright, she simply grew a little more careful, a little more measured, whenever the subject of her in-laws came up at our own kitchen table, choosing her words the way you choose your footing on ice you're not entirely sure will hold. That Tuesday evening, my phone finally rang while sanding an old chair leg in the garage. Claire. "Dad," she said, her voice bright, but with something underneath it I recognized without being able to name yet, the way you recognize a familiar chord before you can say which note is out of place. Julian and I want to do dinner for our anniversary. Marcus offered to host, so it'll be at his place. A brief pause, longer than it needed to be. Please just be easy with him tonight, okay? Marcus Voss was 61 years old, silver-haired, precise in the way he dressed and the way he spoke. A man who had clearly spent decades in rooms where his words settled every disagreement before it fully started. His house reflected the same instinct. Expensive without being warm. Arranged rather than lived in. Every surface catalog perfect, in a way that made you nervous to set down a glass without a coaster. Julian, 31, capable and sharp everywhere else I'd ever seen him, at work, coaching Ethan through a car repair, even arguing calls during football games, seemed to lose an inch of himself the moment he walked through his father's front door, his shoulders drawing in slightly, his voice pitching a half step lower, an entirely different man occupying the same frame. The pattern showed itself early, in small moments scattered across the meal rather than any single obvious offense. Claire began describing a project she'd led at work, a successful product launch she'd clearly been proud of, and Marcus interrupted her mid-sentence to correct a detail about the client's industry, one he'd gotten wrong himself, though nobody at the table pointed that out. Later, when the conversation drifted toward her recent promotion, he waved a hand dismissively. "It's a nice hobby while she figures out what she actually wants to do," he said, smiling as though he'd offered a compliment rather than erased months of her work in a single sentence. Claire's expression didn't change. I noticed that most of all, the practiced stillness of someone who had learned, over time, that reacting only extended these moments rather than ending them. Every conversation, regardless of where it began, found its way back to Marcus's own opinion. The market, the neighborhood, a political story from that morning's paper, each subject narrowing eventually into the same shape. His view stated as fact, everyone else's as something to be corrected. At one point, irritated by some small disagreement Julian had voiced about a business matter, Marcus said, not quite under his breath, "You used to have better judgment before you got married." Julian didn't respond. He simply reached for his water glass, the same quiet absorption I'd watched him practice all evening. Swallowing the comment the way you swallow something you've decided isn't worth choking on in front of company. I'd noticed, over the 3 years of their marriage, how quiet Claire had grown around her father-in-law specifically. A change so gradual I'd never had a single clean moment to point to, nothing worth raising with her directly, just an accumulation of smaller silences, missed jokes, unfinished sentences, that added up to something I couldn't yet name. The kind of pattern a detective learns to feel in his gut long before he can write it down properly. Marcus commanded that table easily, the way he seemed to command every room he entered, and Claire and Julian both shrank by the same small, practiced degree every time he spoke, a habit worn smooth by repetition. Then, halfway through dessert, Marcus mentioned, almost offhand, that he'd reviewed their investment accounts recently and thought they should reconsider a few of their choices. Claire set her fork down, the small clink of it against the plate, the loudest sound at the table. "We've actually got that handled, Marcus," she said, evenly, clearly, her voice carrying none of the careful smallness it had held all evening. "We don't need you looking at our accounts anymore." It was the first time, in 3 years, that I had ever heard my daughter push back against him directly, in front of everyone. Marcus set down his wine glass slowly, the practiced calm of a man unaccustomed to being told no, settling over his face like a mask he'd worn 1,000 times before. "I'm only trying to help," he said, his tone even, reasonable on its surface, the tone of a man who has never once had to defend his own generosity before. "That's what family does. We appreciate that," Claire said, still steady, still calm, her hands folded neatly in her lap. But Julian and I have it handled. We'd like to manage our own accounts going forward without your involvement." The reasonableness drained out of Marcus almost instantly, replaced by something colder. "I see," he said. "So, this is what it's come to." He looked past Claire toward Julian, who had gone very quiet beside her. "You've turned my own son against me, is that the plan?" "Nobody's turning anyone against anyone here, Marcus," Claire said. "Julian used to have judgment," Marcus continued, as though she hadn't spoken at all, his voice climbing. "Before he married beneath it. He said the words plainly, without hesitation, the way you state something you consider simple fact rather than cruelty." The table went silent. Carol's hand found my knee under the table, a small, familiar signal we'd developed over 36 years. "Steady, Sam, not yet." Julian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The same absorbed, practiced silence I'd watched him carry all evening, swallowing something that clearly cost him more each time he swallowed it. Ethan, sitting beside Claire, finally spoke, his voice quiet but entirely clear. "That's enough, Marcus." Marcus's head snapped toward him, some old familiar current of authority flooding into his face, the look of a man who has never once, in his own home, been told to stop by someone younger than him. "Excuse me." "I said that's enough," Ethan repeated, calm, unwavering. "You don't get to talk to your own son like that, not at his anniversary dinner." What happened next took less than 2 seconds, though it's stretched considerably longer every time I've replayed it since, the way memory does with the moments that matter most. Marcus rose from his chair, fast, and shoved Ethan hard, both hands against his chest, the motion of a man who has never once had to consider the physical consequences of his own anger. Ethan stumbled backward, catching his heel on the leg of his chair, arms windmilling briefly as he tried and failed to catch his own balance, and went down against the corner of the sideboard, his eyebrow splitting open on the edge of it with a sound I felt more than heard, his wrist twisting awkwardly beneath him as he threw out a hand to catch his fall. Some men mistake being obeyed for being respected, and the difference only becomes visible the one time somebody finally says no. I was on my feet and across the room before I'd fully registered standing up at all. 30 years of instinct arriving faster than conscious thought ever could. I didn't strike him. I've never once needed to strike a man to stop him. I simply took Marcus's raised arm in one controlled grip, turning him half a step away from Ethan, my body between the two of them before Marcus had even finished processing what he'd just done. "Sam," Marcus started, already reaching for some version of an explanation. "Don't," I said firmly, my voice low, flat, the same voice I'd used on 100 men over 30 years who believed, right up until the moment they didn't, that their anger entitled them to something. "Don't move again, I mean that." Behind me, I heard Carol's voice, already steady, already dialing. "Yes, I need an ambulance," she said, giving the address without a single tremor in it. 36 years of marriage to a cop having taught her exactly how to sound calm when nothing around her was. The polished table sat behind us, wine glasses still full, dessert plates barely touched, the whole elegant arrangement of the evening completely undisturbed by the ugliness that had just broken across it in a matter of seconds. Ethan sat against the sideboard, one hand pressed to his eyebrow, blood already slipping between his fingers, his other wrist cradled carefully against his chest. Claire knelt beside her brother immediately, her voice soft and steadying, murmuring reassurances I couldn't quite make out. Julian stood frozen near his chair, staring at his father as though he were seeing him, fully, clearly, for the very first time in his life. I held Marcus's arm a moment longer, feeling the tension finally start to leave it, watching the color slowly drain from his own face as the reality of what he'd done seemed to catch up with him a full 10 seconds behind everyone else in the room. I understood. standing there in that spotless dining room with my son bleeding onto an imported rug, that whatever quiet accommodation this family had made with Marcus Voss over the years had just ended, permanently, in front of all of us. There was no version of tonight that any of us could pretend our way back out of. And some part of me, the part that had spent 30 years learning exactly how these moments unfold, already understood that the hardest work was still ahead of us, not behind. The paramedics who arrived were two of Ethan's own crew, a detail that made the whole scene feel smaller and stranger than it already was. Watching two men he worked shifts alongside kneel over him now, instead of the other way around. One of them, a young woman named Priya, kept up an easy, familiar patter as she checked his wrist, the kind of professional warmth Ethan himself used on strangers every week, now turned back on him instead. "You'd tell me if this hurt worse than you're letting on," she said, and Ethan managed a weak laugh, telling her he'd write her up for insubordination if she kept fussing. The two of them falling into an easy rhythm even now, even here. Marcus, once I finally released his arm, recovered his composure with unsettling speed, smoothing his jacket, straightening his collar, the mask sliding back into place almost seamlessly. By the time the responding officer arrived, he'd already positioned himself near the doorway, calm, cooperative, entirely convincing. "It was a misunderstanding," I heard him tell the officer, his voice even, reasonable, exactly the tone he'd used all evening before any of this happened. "My son-in-law's brother got aggressive with me first. I was simply trying to defend myself." I said nothing in that moment beyond what the officer asked me directly. When it was my turn, I told him plainly what I'd witnessed. No embellishment, no editorializing. The same flat, factual delivery I'd used on hundreds of witness statements over 30 years, understanding better than most in that room how easily a story could tilt depending on who told it first and with how much confidence. The ambulance pulled away with Ethan inside it, Claire riding along beside him, Julian standing frozen in his own driveway, unable to decide, it seemed, which direction his loyalty was even supposed to point tonight. Carol drove us home in silence, the kind that isn't empty so much as full, both of us turning the evening over in our own separate ways, the streetlights sliding past in steady, familiar rhythm along roads we'd driven 1,000 times before, though nothing about tonight felt familiar at all. About 10 minutes in, she glanced over at me, her eyes flicking briefly from the road. "What are you thinking, Sam?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into the glove box for the small notebook I keep there, the one I bring on every long drive out of old habit, and started writing. Times, exact phrasing, the order everything happened in, while it was still fresh enough to trust completely. The same discipline that had carried me through 30 years of nights far worse than this one. Carol waited, patient, the way she's always been patient with this particular habit of mine, saying nothing more until I was ready. "He's going to try to make all of this disappear quietly," I finally said, still writing, not looking up. "I don't think I'm going to let him." The paramedics who arrived were two of Ethan's own crew, a detail that made the whole scene feel smaller and stranger than it already was. Watching two men he worked shifts alongside kneel over him now, instead of the other way around. One of them, a young woman named Priya, kept up an easy, familiar patter as she checked his wrist, the kind of professional warmth Ethan himself used on strangers every week, now turned back on him instead. "You'd tell me if this hurt worse than you're letting on," she said, and Ethan managed a weak laugh, telling her he'd write her up for insubordination if she kept fussing. The two of them falling into an easy rhythm even now, even here. Marcus, once I finally released his arm, recovered his composure with unsettling speed, smoothing his jacket, straightening his collar, the mask sliding back into place almost seamlessly. By the time the responding officer arrived, He'd already positioned himself near the doorway, calm, cooperative, entirely convincing. It was a misunderstanding, I heard him tell the officer. His voice even, reasonable, exactly the tone he'd used all evening before any of this happened. My son-in-law's brother got aggressive with me first. I was simply trying to defend myself. I said nothing in that moment beyond what the officer asked me directly. When it was my turn, I told him plainly what I'd witnessed. No embellishment, no editorializing. The same flat, factual delivery I'd used on hundreds of witness statements over 30 years. Understanding, better than most in that room, how easily a story could tilt depending on who told it first and with how much confidence. The ambulance pulled away with Ethan inside it, Claire riding along beside him, Julian standing frozen in his own driveway, unable to decide, it seemed, which direction his loyalty was even supposed to point tonight. Carol drove us home in silence, the kind that isn't empty so much as full, both of us turning the evening over in our own separate ways, the streetlights sliding past in steady, familiar rhythm along roads we'd driven 1,000 times before, though nothing about tonight felt familiar at all. About 10 minutes in, she glanced over at me, her eyes flicking briefly from the road. "What are you thinking, Sam?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into the glove box for the small notebook I keep there, the one I bring on every long drive out of old habit, and started writing, times, exact phrasing, the order everything happened in, while it was still fresh enough to trust completely. The same discipline that had carried me through 30 years of nights far worse than this one. Carol waited, patient, the way she's always been patient with this particular habit of mine, saying nothing more until I was ready. "He's going to try to make all of this disappear quietly," I finally said, still writing, not looking up. "I don't think I'm going to let him." The conference room at Marcus's firm sat high above the river. Glass walls, a long, polished table, the kind of room built to make people feel small before a single word is spoken. The city spread out silently below us through floor-to-ceiling windows. Gordon Ashby opened the meeting exactly the way I'd expected him to, smooth, measured, entirely confident, a legal pad squared in front of him and a pen already uncapped. The posture of a man who has done this exact kind of meeting many times before and never once lost one. "We appreciate everyone coming today," he said, glancing around the table at Julian, Claire, and me, his tone warm in the careful professional way that costs nothing and promises even less. "Our hope is to resolve this like reasonable adults, without dragging the family through a public process that helps no one, and frankly, causes far more harm than good for everyone at this table, including Ethan." I let him finish completely. The same patience I'd learned decades earlier interviewing men who talked longer when they believed silence meant agreement. Then I opened the folder. I laid out the printed stills from Mrs. Hollis's doorbell camera first, time-stamped clearly enough to contradict, point for point, the account Marcus had given the responding officer that night. Gordon leaned forward slightly, studying the images despite himself. I set the 2 written witness statements beside them, plain, consistent, neither one leaving much room for interpretation, both signed and dated in careful, deliberate handwriting. Then I placed the 11-year-old civil complaint on top of everything else, the language in it close enough to what had happened at that dinner table that it barely needed explaining at all. "Douglas Reyes filed this 11 years ago," I said, keeping my voice level, unhurried, the folder open flat between us. I read a single line aloud, letting each word land on its own. "The plaintiff alleges the defendant, in a moment of escalating anger during a business dispute, physically shoved him without provocation, causing him to fall against a nearby table." I looked up, meeting Marcus's eyes directly for the first time since we'd sat down. That case settled quietly, sealed. Nobody outside a courthouse filing room was ever meant to see it again. Marcus's composure broke for the first time since I'd known him, something in his face collapsing all at once, the practiced calm gone entirely, replaced by something raw and unguarded I'd never once seen him show in 3 years. Gordon Ashby went very still beside him, his pen no longer moving across his legal pad, his own composure faltering slightly as he glanced down at the filing in front of him. "This isn't the first time," I said, quiet and even, letting the words sit in the room exactly as long as they needed to. "It's just the first time someone was willing to write it down, instead of quietly accepting an apology and letting it disappear." Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Julian, who had said almost nothing since we'd sat down, finally lifted his head. His voice, when it came, was unsteady at first, but it grew clearer with every word. "I knew about the complaint," he said. "I found out years ago, before Claire and I even married, going through some old files in Dad's home office looking for something else entirely. I never told anyone. I told myself it was one bad meeting, a long time ago, that people say and do things under pressure they wouldn't otherwise, that everyone deserves one moment they're not proud of." He paused, his hands flat against the table in front of him, steadying himself. "I've been telling myself some version of that my entire life. Every time I watched him talk to Claire, every time I watched him talk to me, I just never once called it what it actually was." He looked at his father directly, fully, for the first time in the entire meeting. "I'm not doing that again," he said. "Not with my own family, not with Ethan, not with Claire." Claire reached quietly beneath the table and found Julian's hand, holding it tightly, her own composure steady even as her eyes shone. Marcus opened his mouth once, the same reflex I'd watched him rely on all evening weeks earlier, some rehearsed explanation clearly forming behind his eyes. Nothing came out. For the first time since I'd met the man, he had absolutely nothing rehearsed left to offer, no smooth redirection, no reasonable-sounding frame to place around what was sitting on the table in front of him. Gordon Ashby cleared his throat quietly, glancing briefly at his client before speaking again. "I think," he said carefully, "we should take a short recess." Marcus didn't object. He didn't say anything at all. He simply sat back in his chair, the fight visibly gone out of him. A man who had walked into that room certain of exactly how it would end, discovering instead that the ending had already been decided somewhere else entirely, weeks before he'd even known to be afraid of it. Through the glass wall behind him, the city went on exactly as it had before we'd walked in, indifferent to what had just happened in this one small room high above it. And for a long moment none of us moved at all. The recess lasted nearly 40 minutes. When Gordon Ashby returned, alone this time, he didn't sit back down. He stood near the head of the table, his earlier polish considerably diminished, his tie slightly loosened in a way I doubted he'd noticed himself. "There's no version of quietly resolving this left available to us," he said, choosing his words with visible care, each one landing like something he'd rehearsed on the walk back into the room. "The family has decided to let the assault charge proceed through the appropriate channels, rather than negotiate around it. Marcus understands that, and he won't be contesting it." I nodded once, unsurprised, closing the folder in front of me with the same quiet finality I'd carried into the room hours earlier. A civil protective order followed within the week, limiting Marcus's contact with Ethan entirely, and requiring supervised, limited contact with Julian and Claire going forward, filed cleanly, without complication. The paperwork itself almost anticlimactic compared to everything that had led to it. Thin sheets of language finally catching up to something that had needed catching up for years. In the parking lot afterward, the late afternoon sun cutting long, tired shadows across the pavement, Julian found Ethan first. "I'm sorry," he said plainly, without qualifying it, without softening it with excuses about his father or the family or years of accumulated pressure. "I should have said something a long time before tonight." Ethan, his arm still resting in its brace, nodded slowly. "I know," he said quietly, and left it there, the simple honesty of the exchange somehow more healing than a much longer conversation would have been. Julian turned to me next, his voice unsteady in a way I hadn't heard from him before. "I've spent 3 years telling myself it wasn't my place to say anything," he said. "That he was my father, that families work things out privately, that speaking up would only make everything worse. It's your place now," I told him gently, meaning it as plainly as I knew how. "That's really the whole job, once you notice something's wrong. Nobody hands you permission for it. You just decide eventually to use it." Claire had stayed quiet through most of the walk to the car, her arms crossed loosely against the evening chill, her eyes fixed somewhere past the rows of parked cars. Finally, near the passenger door, she said what she'd clearly been holding all day, her voice smaller than I was used to hearing from her. "I didn't think anyone would believe me over him, Dad. Not really. He's always so composed, so reasonable sounding, even when he's being cruel. I worried it would just be my word against his, and everyone would find a way to land somewhere in the middle." I looked at my daughter for a long moment, letting the weight of what she'd just admitted settle fully before I answered. "I always would have," I said simply. "You just never needed to test it until now." She nodded slowly, something loosening visibly in her shoulders, the particular relief of a fear finally being proven entirely unnecessary. Ethan, standing awkwardly by the car with his brace, broke the heaviness first, the way he always managed to, even now, even after everything the evening had cost him. "So," he said, glancing between the three of us with the faint, tired grin I'd known since he was a boy, "does anyone want to get dinner somewhere that isn't Marcus's dining room?" It was the very first real laugh any of us had managed all day long. The assault charge moved through the legal process over the following months mostly in the background, the way these things do once the initial shock wears off and the ordinary business of daily life reasserts itself around it, resolved eventually with a plea and a mandatory anger management program, handled procedurally, briefly, a few phone calls from the prosecutor's office rather than anything that consumed our lives the way that first evening had. Marcus didn't contest any of it, and none of us spent much energy discussing him once the paperwork was finally settled. Julian made a decision none of us ever asked him to make. Within a month, he'd separated his own consulting work entirely from his father's firm, setting up a small office downtown under his own name, a modest space above a coffee shop with second-hand furniture and a lease he signed himself, taking a real pay cut to do it, the kind of financial hit that would have terrified him 3 years earlier when every decision still ran through Marcus's quiet approval first. He never framed it as punishment toward his own father, not once, not even privately to me. He simply said once, over coffee at our kitchen table, that he needed his work to belong to him completely, the same way his marriage did, and that he'd spent too long letting one man's name sit over the top of both. Ethan's wrist healed cleanly over those same weeks, the cast coming off on schedule, physical therapy filling in the rest with slow, steady progress. He was back on shift again within just 2 months, riding beside Priya again just like before, trading the same easy jokes they always had shared, the two of them falling right back into their old rhythm as though the whole incident had simply been a bad night rather than a lasting shadow over his work. Somewhere in that stretch, half joking at first, he started carrying a small notebook of his own in his jacket pocket. "For work," he told Carol, grinning, the same way I once had at his age, back when Carol used to roll her eyes fondly at the whole habit. Within a few weeks, the joke quietly stopped being a joke at all. I noticed him writing in it after a difficult call one Sunday, sitting alone at our kitchen table for a few minutes before joining the rest of us. The same careful, deliberate handwriting I recognized from somewhere much closer to home than either of us probably wanted to admit out loud. Sunday dinners moved permanently to our house after that, Carol's kitchen filling with the same easy noise it always used to have. Nothing performative about it. Nothing arranged for anyone's approval, plates that didn't match. Chairs pulled in from the garage when we ran short. Nobody corrected anyone's account of their own workday out loud. Nobody's hard-earned promotion got reduced to a hobby over dessert anymore. Claire laughed more freely and more often at that table than I'd seen her laugh in years, and Julian, more often than not, was the one who made her laugh. Easy and unguarded in a way that had nothing at all to do with performing for anyone watching. One evening, as Carol cleared plates and Ethan argued cheerfully with Claire about some movie neither of them had actually finished watching, Julian found me alone on the back porch, the evening cooling around us, crickets starting up somewhere past the fence line. He stood there a moment before speaking, almost shy in a way that didn't entirely match the man who'd stood up to his own father in that conference room months earlier. "Would you teach me?" he asked, turning his coffee mug slowly in his hands, staring out at the darkening yard rather than at me. "How you know what's actually worth writing down?" I've been carrying a notebook around for weeks now, and I still don't really know what I'm supposed to be looking for. I didn't answer him directly, not right away. Instead, I went inside, opened the drawer where I kept a small stack of blank ones Carol had bought me years ago as a birthday gift, half joking at the time that I'd apparently never run out of things worth writing down, and brought one back out to him, setting it in his hands without ceremony. Julian turned it over once, running his thumb along the plain leather cover, then opened it to the first page, pen already in hand, clearly unsure yet exactly what belonged there. The same uncertainty I remembered from my own first weeks on the job, decades before either of us had any idea this particular quiet Sunday evening was waiting for us somewhere down the long, unpredictable road ahead. People sometimes ask me, even now, if I wanted to hit him, standing there in that dining room with my own son bleeding onto the rug. I did, honestly, for about half a second. Then 30 years of training took over instead, and I never once threw a punch that whole night. The version of taking matters into my own hands that actually worked had nothing to do with my hands at all. The most dangerous thing you can be to a man who's used to controlling every room is someone who simply writes down what actually happened. I still carry that same notebook most days, though these Sundays it sits quietly in my jacket pocket instead of doing much work at all. Julian's notebook does the heavier lifting these days, and honestly, I really don't mind that one bit. If this story reminded you of a time you had to protect your family with patience instead of anger, I'd love to hear about it. Share it in the comments. Like this video if it meant something to you, and subscribe for more true stories about family, quiet resolve, and the discipline it takes to do this the right way.